Welcome to a live episode of Surviving the Survivor. We bring you the best guests in all of true crime. Don't forget to subscribe and smash that like button. Here's your host, Emmy Award-winning broadcaster, Joel Waldman.
What's up, STS Nation, and welcome to a second consecutive episode of Surviving the Survivor, the podcast that promises to bring you the very best guests in all of true crime. And it has been a day and a half today. We were supposed to have Susan Hendricks on, former CNN anchor. She wrote a book entitled Down the Hill, but she has some sort of breaking news related to the case that she is involved in, and called me literally about 3 minutes ago, apologizing profusely. So she just wanted you to know that, and that's the nature of the news business. I totally understand, and we'll get her on maybe after closings, which I didn't realize were going to be tomorrow until today. So I don't know that anybody did, but we are going to get Susan back on. But I am happy to introduce right now Lauren Matthias. Most of you do know her. She's worked as a reporter and anchor for ABC, NBC, Fox News in East Idaho, Boise, Idaho, and Salt Lake City. She's now the co-host, along with her husband, of Hidden True Crime, one of the better true crime podcasts out there. If you're not following Hidden True Crime, make sure you're following Hidden True Crime. Lauren really made a name for herself and the show with the Lori Vallow Daybell case, and is doing so once again with the Delphi double murder trial. And I know it's a lot of hard work. I was just covering Sarah Boone for 2 weeks, and Lauren's been gone much longer. Also welcoming top right corner, Marcus Truccio. Did I pronounce it correctly?
Yes, you did.
Beautiful. He joined Wayne 15. That's an affiliate out of, is it Indianapolis?
Fort Wayne, Indiana.
Fort Wayne, Indiana. He joined in September 2023. He is from New Jersey, as am I. A place called Westwood, New Jersey. I'm from Highland Park. And he is a graduate of Purdue University. For those who do not know anything about this story, very quickly, Richard Allen is the defendant. He's accused in the 2017 murders of teenagers, 13-year-old Abby Williams and 14-year-old Libby German. They were found with their throats slit, which is hard to hear, after going on a walk on a trail back in Delphi, Indiana. This trial began October 18th. Today is November 6th. I'll let you do the math. No cameras have been allowed in the courtroom, and Richard Allen's facing charges of first-degree murder, conspiracy, and solicitation in connection with the deaths of the two girls. So, Lauren, today was obviously a big day. The defense rested, I think, first thing in the morning, and then the state had a couple rebuttal witnesses, and closing arguments are set tomorrow. And I understand it's going to be 2.5 hours allotted to each side. So before we even get there, how's this whole experience been for you? How tough has it been to, this is a difficult case to cover, very difficult.
An incredibly difficult case to cover. You know, I've covered quite a few trials now, and I would say that this is the most difficult in that not only are the facts difficult to hear, you mentioned what this crime is, but the way we have to get into the courtroom and how it is done. Many of us, I have slept outside of the courtroom a few nights. I bought myself a sleeping bag once I arrived, and I thought I packed well, but I didn't realize I would need a sleeping bag. And the lines to get in are very intense. Only about 24 people from the public allowed in each time. At other trials, like the Alec Baldwin trial, I have been able to get in as media, but Judge Gull has made it very clear. Marcus here, he's media, local news, but any podcaster, any YouTuber, absolutely not. So we have to wait in very, very long lines to get in. And then it is very difficult to hear everything going on. And then, of course, there's no live tweeting. There's no typing on our computers to quickly grab notes. And the public is completely relying on all of us in the courtroom because there is no audio, there is no video. And, we have to work with everyone in there. What did you hear? What did you hear? It's difficult to hear. So it's exhausting too. So not just exhausting emotionally to see what these girls went through. We've seen crime scene photos. We've seen autopsy photos. We've cried together in that courtroom, but it's also just been physically exhausting. And it's taken a village, at least for the podcasters and the YouTubers, it's taken a village just to be able to sit in there with line sitters and organizing and saving places and taking turns sleeping. But it's been worth it in the end, because I do believe that people really, really need to know what's going on in there. And I actually want to compliment Marcus too, because it's brought me back, and we've all been in local news. It's the three of us, all of us, and Marcus is in it now. It's brought me back to just remembering just how important local news is. We know that it's always been important, but without reporters in that courtroom, the public has no idea of what's going on. And it's just been, so needed to have journalists in there and to be paying attention. And, this is a really long-winded answer, Joel, but I feel like I could write a book on it after these 2 weeks. It has been absolutely heartbreaking. And I think I'm forever changed after this trial.
Interesting to hear. I'm thinking of covering the Maddie Soto case up in Orlando, which I'm going to cover, but that is another one that I'm sort of terrified to cover because of the evidence that's going to be brought in. But I feel your pain. This stuff is difficult. I don't think reporters sometimes get the credit for dealing with difficult situations. This is one of them, but it has to be reported on. And as Lauren just said, there's no cameras. You can't even you can't live tweet, right? You can't do any of that.
Nope.
Yeah, none of that is happening. So, Marcus, forgive me. I'm going to come to you, but I'm going to go a little bit longer with Lauren, because Lauren only has till 7:30. And then if you're cool with it, Marcus, we'll hang on, go over more and take some questions from STS Nation. And again, I probably didn't say it in the best way possible. Susan Hendricks, who wrote the book Down the Hill about this case, she's a friend. She called me 5 minutes before the show or less. It's not breaking news in the sense of breaking news regarding the trial, but better way to say it is she's got a really amazing scoop that any reporter would take. And she felt horrible about having to cancel last minute. So it's not breaking in relation, because some people are asking, what's the breaking news regarding Delphi? It's not that. It is the fact that she just has, I guess, business to attend to. Marcus, just tell us a little bit about the day today. Let's go there. From what I understand, again, the defense rested. The state called some rebuttal witnesses, and then court adjourned at 2:15. So you've been out of court for a while. Were we expecting the defense to rest in the manner that they did? It seemed like it was very abrupt. So that first, and who were these, or how many rebuttal witnesses were there?
Yeah, to answer your question, I don't think that many people in the courtroom were expecting to see how the defense rested. I heard some people thinking maybe they thought they were going to rest yesterday or later today, but the jury came in this morning and Judge Gull asked for them to call their next witness, and they said, we rest our case. So Judge Gull was caught off guard. She even said, because afterwards they were, prosecution and defense were told to get their jury instructions together, and she didn't expect to have that conversation that early. And we were able to see reactions from the jurors as well, them kind of mumbling amongst themselves, kind of looking a little surprised that it happened at 9:06 this morning. And I don't think the prosecution was expecting it either, because their rebuttal witnesses were coming in for later that day. So we actually had to break a little bit to wait for those witnesses to get there. So that commenced a little after 10 o'clock, I believe. And they had three witnesses. They had a woman who was on the trail the afternoon that Abby and Libby went missing, who previously took the stand when the state was presenting their case. And then we heard from Detective Brian Harshman with Indiana State Police. He listened to hundreds of hours of phone calls that Richard Allen made while he was in prison to his family, and also watched video of Richard Allen in his cell and in various transports throughout the prison. So he testified as well. And both of those testimonies were very short in comparison to other testimonies in the trial. And the third witness that was called in rebuttal today by the prosecution was Richard Allen's psychiatrist in Westville Correctional Facility. And that took hours. And the prosecution was asking about things that he did while Richard Allen was under his care, things that he observed, asking if he observed any psychotic behavior, anything like that. He did say in April he did observe psychotic behavior. But then defense had their chance to cross-examine just like in regular arguments throughout the trial.
Okay, so I'm gonna lean into Lauren here a little bit. So just piggybacking on what Marcus just said, this witness, his name is Dr. John Martin. He's with the Indiana State Prison System. His testimony was interesting. So he was a rebuttal witness, Lauren.
He was a rebuttal witness because the defense during their time brought in their own psychologist actually, and so as a rebuttal, they brought in not even their own psychiatrist. They brought in Richard Allen's own psychiatrist while in Westville, and I agree with Marcus. It was very compelling. He was on the stand for hours, and I'd love to know what Marcus thinks. Here we are, two different minds, two different hearing the same testimony. For me, it was very compelling. He talked about when he diagnosed Richard Allen with psychosis, when he presented psychosis, and how they medicated him, how he monitored him for several weeks, and how then after several weeks, after he noticed that he was back to baseline, he was at his baseline self again, then they continued to, he continued to monitor him for several weeks. And after he was at his baseline for several weeks, stopping medication. And during that time, June 20th, 2023, so we're talking last year, he states that Richard Allen said to him, I want to say sorry to the families. After he was, he claims there was no presentation of psychosis, and he stated this. This is very compelling because according to the defense, while Richard Allen, we have now heard of him confessing to numerous people, witness after witness has shared about him confessing to these crimes, to killing Abby and Libby. The defense's stance is he was in psychosis, he was in solitary confinement, he was tortured. It made him go, he has no sense of reality, and these are false confessions. So to hear this testimony was very, very important in my mind. It just sort of put all the pieces together, and the jury was certainly listening, and they were certainly taking notes. But again, I honestly would love to know what Marcus thought as someone in local news there.
Yeah, Marcus, I'm going to let you jump in 1 sec. I just want to kind of flesh out a little bit. So this doctor said that Richard Allen was being kept in solitary confinement and was being treated as if he was already a convicted criminal, even though he wasn't. That's what his testimony was. He began showing signs of
Not
psychosis.
this psychologist.
Oh, no?
This psychologist?
That's
this psychologist explained that there was a difference between safekeeping and solitary. He said that there was solitary, but that no, he had a tablet. He was talking daily with a therapist. That
is this the one who said he had a chair in the cell? Was that this guy?
I don't recall him saying he had a chair. You might be thinking of the defense's psychologist that they brought in, who actually assessed Richard Allen after the fact and watched video and audio.
Okay.
Of him.
Now, is this the guy who said he gets to Allen's cell when he was having like a psychotic episode and he finds him naked on a mattress? That's this guy.
He found him. That was when he diagnosed him in psychosis. He was actually called an emergency because he was naked. He was covered in some feces. And then at that moment he presented as psychotic. And that's when they chose to start him on the medication. He explained. And then he said that after about a week or two on the medication, he came back to baseline. Correct me if I'm wrong, Marcus. This is what I heard. It came back to baseline.
Correct.
Yeah, you're okay.
Yeah.
And then after 7 weeks of saying that he did not present psychotic and was baseline and back to normal, started confessing again. And then they shared how it was different than solitary confinement. That while he referred to it as solitary confinement, at some point he explained that he had a tablet and they did things to make him comfortable.
So Marcus, I didn't want to interrupt you there. Lauren wanted to get your take on what you thought about the testimony. By the way, Lauren is going to be starting her own show in like 11 minutes. So you're going to get amazing information there. But Marcus, your thoughts on the testimony that was given today.
Yeah, I agree with Lauren. It was very compelling. And even though this was a state witness, I think he kind of gave information that lended to both sides, because he did say that Richard Allen he diagnosed him with psychosis in April of 2023. And he also did say that while he defined it as a one-man cell instead of solitary confinement, that the conditions that he was in weren't added additional risk factors to someone with pre-existing mental health conditions, which Richard Allen had. So he did say that, even though he was a state witness, but he also said that, like Lauren just said, once he reviewed that he got back to baseline in June of 2023, which he says is the same way that he came into Westville, he was still hearing confessions. So there was kind of two sides that this witness, he maybe helped the defense a little bit at one part, but then went back to helping the state a little bit in his argument, which is, again, why the jurors were very paying a lot of attention to this testimony.
I'm glad you brought up jurors. Rosemary Romero's outside of Toronto, Canada. Does Lauren feel, and I know, Lauren, you might not answer this, that the state has reached their burden of proof to get a conviction against Richard Allen? However you want to answer that, coupled with who are these jurors, how many, the makeup, and what have you made of them so far in terms of the reactions?
Yeah. No, I this is what I'll say. I think they have laid out some compelling evidence, and I do feel like this jury could come back guilty. I also feel like they could come back hung. I feel like they could come back not guilty. I think that that's sort of the intriguing part of this trial in this case. But yeah, I do. Look, we've heard from multiple witness after witness after witness that he confessed. To me, the testimonies that I've heard, including of the audio, sound like confessions to me, and they don't sound like someone that's, in psychosis to me. So this is one person's opinion that's been sitting in the trial every day. And there's no DNA. That's doesn't lend well to guilt, but
and no weapon, correct? Even though the throats were cut, there was
no weapon. But I believe that, honestly, sorry, I just got distracted for a second. I believe that there's an alibi that's really, really solid as well, and that to me is incredibly compelling. So as someone that's just been watching, I think they've certainly met a burden of proof, but I also believe that there could be jurors that don't believe that, that don't feel that way because of some questions with his mental health and some, the doubt that the defense has brought in about his mental health and about the DNA. There's also a cartridge, right, that was found at the crime scene that matched to Richard Allen's gun, and of course the defense has brought in some doubt about that and the science behind that. So what the jury is thinking is I don't know. I do not know.
What's the makeup of the jury? Are they, how many men, how many women?
Is it 5? Is it 4?
It's 7 women and 5 men.
5 men.
And there's 3 women alternates that when they're deliberating, they can't speak unless something happens to one of those first 12 jurors.
And you guys know who the alternates are? Do you know who they are?
I don't.
Yeah,
Do you,
they are so this will make sense to Lauren, but they're the 3 jurors that are sitting at the black table in front of the jury box.
And they know that they're the alternates, because sometimes they don't know, but they do know that they're the. That's interesting. Okay, because Sarah Boone. Go ahead, Lauren.
I was going to say, I just want to clear something too really quick. I mentioned it was a psychiatrist that testified today, and there was a question of a psychologist, and so I just want to make sure that's probably why you got confused. It was a psychiatrist today. He also had a psychologist in Westville, and then there was a psychologist that testified for the defense, but this is the only psychiatrist that has testified. So psychiatrist, medical, meds, psychologist has been more therapy, that the psychologist at Westville, and then the psychologist that the defense brought in did analysis or evaluations.
Oh, and KCL saying that there is a psychologist on the jury. That's interesting. Is that true, Lauren, that we know of?
Yeah, that's what I have heard.
KCL
I did not
is always
attend
right.
Selection, but yes.
Yeah. KCL, I've never known her to be wrong. There's also some testimony, Lauren, today. And again, I'm going a little heavier with Lauren because she has to jump in a few minutes, and we're going to stick around with Marcus, who's given us amazing insight from inside the courtroom. I'll tell you this: I was not as composed and detailed and as accurate as Marcus when I was his age. Not even, and I'm not that way now, but definitely not back then. There was some kind of testimony regarding headphones, like being plugged in. Lauren, was that today? What was that all about?
Yeah, that was yesterday. And yesterday there was some interesting evidence. It was brand new. No one had ever heard it. It was the defense's witness. And she came in, she's worked for the FBI. She has her own cell analyst analyzing company and has done 10 years for the FBI. She came in and she said that she went through all of the data and the information that Indiana State Police did, all these cell phone extractions using Cellbrite, using Axiom, everything, Knowledge C data system. And she said there was this one moment, and really the defense wanted her to really focus on this moment where Libby's phone allegedly turned back on, or should we say reconnected to a signal. This is a big part of the defense's like questioning, like why, was it turned off? Did it go somewhere? They want to like have some, is the timeline really accurate? And their witness sort of said, look, there was a moment when right before the phone sort of settled and didn't move again and went out of service, that there was perhaps a earphone plugged into the auxiliary, into the, like something external was put into the auxiliary that they said were earphones. It came back as an earphone. And she brought this up. It was the first time anyone had ever heard about it. And it definitely was intriguing. As was the cross exam, Marcus can tell you about.
By the way, how are the state and defense getting along? I can tell you at the Sarah Boone trial, they were like at odds, wanted to kind of rip each other's heads off, but are they being cordial with each other?
I don't know. I feel like they are, a lot of objections, which you can expect, but I feel like for the most part, they are being cordial. We see them outside of court too. We see them talking in court, without the objections. And I feel like they're getting along. What are your thoughts, Marcus? I'm asking you because I'm curious what you think.
Yeah, I'd overall say that they have their moments, but yes, they'll walk up to each other even before they're on the record and just hand each other whatever information they need to do, and it's very cordial for the most part. I'd say maybe 5% of the time it does get a little heated, but that's going to happen, especially in a trial like this.
Back to Lauren on this one. A couple more minutes with Lauren. From Purdue nurse here. And I think Marcus is a graduate of Purdue. So there you go. With the questions from the jurors lead you to think about an increased chance of a hung jury. Have there been a lot of juror questions?
There have been so many juror questions, and they have been so detailed and so unique and not what I would expect at all.
Give us an example of one.
Okay, let's see. An example of one, I'll bring one up that I recently heard. Let's see here. In fact, I have my notes right here. Let me tell you some. This is today. Oh, this is yesterday. This is about the cell phone analysis. Did you write your own report of the timeline? They're asking the person that did the analysis. Would an iPad have its own Knowledge C database? Would water or moisture affect movement? Now, that was a big one because that opened up the door to some really interesting questioning then by the prosecution. And had that juror not asked that question, I don't know if they could have even approached it. And that allowed the prosecution to jump in with, well, would water affect the port or plug-in for the phone? So, I mean, this is a juror that's thinking like, they had not mentioned water, right? They had not mentioned any water. Here we are announcing, oh, by the way, we have earphones being plugged into the phone jack. So what's that? And some juror is thinking, well, gosh, I know that they crossed a creek allegedly, right? So could it be water damage? And they're riding it and they're sending it in. And when it comes to whether or not that makes me think about a hung jury, it absolutely does. I feel like there are some questions someday that makes me realize, oh, this person's leaning towards guilt. And there are other questions that make me think this person is not convinced and thinks Richard Allen might be innocent. I mean, to me, at least.
And look at Stephanie. She says, I strongly believe he's innocent. Lauren, at one point, and I got to let you go in a couple minutes, but at one point, we were hearing about Odinism, which is this Norse religion / cult. But are there any other, publicly besides that, are there other possible suspects here that were possibly overlooked? Or is it the kind of the consensus here that Richard Allen was the only guy that could have done this?
Look, this was a case that there was no arrest for 5 years, right? So this is a very small town, 3,000 people, Delphi, Indiana. This was a horrible, brutal, shocking crime. So within 5 years, think of how many people sent in a tip to police suggesting maybe their neighbor might have something to do with it. This was a town on edge. There were multiple suspects by police, and then there were multiple tips, hundreds, thousands of tips coming in 5 years of people suspecting everyone next to him. So yeah, that continues, right? And then Richard Allen is arrested in 2022, has not been on any documentary, any podcast, any suspect, any person of interest, just out of the blue. That in itself is going to lend to people always wondering if somebody else was involved, or if he's a fall guy, if there's more to this story. I think just how out of the blue it was and how invested people were in solving this case, when then all of a sudden someone's arrested in 2022 and it's like, what? We've never heard of this guy. He worked at the CVS. What? So that is, I think there's always going to be that question. And of course, the defense wanted to bring that questioning into their case because it's compelling. As far as what I've seen, as far as the evidence, I came in fairly open-minded, and I'm going to remain open-minded. I've said it could go either way. For me personally, just the confessions. I can't get over all the confessions.
Is it true that he's confessed over 60 times? Wow,
Yes.
That's unbelievable.
To multiple different people.
Yeah. Lauren, final 2 questions for you, because I know you have to go. What's kind of the creep factor, or not, with Richard Allen, seeing him in the courtroom, sitting there? What has that been like for you? You get any weird vibes off of him? And just your final thoughts here. And thank you for your coverage. It's amazing that you've been there and doing this for so long, and you're at the finish line here. So I know everyone appreciates the amazing job you've done. If you are not following Hidden True Crime podcast, you better start. Go ahead, Lauren.
Thank you, Joel. As far as Richard Allen in court, we know that he has suffered from mental illness his whole life. In fact, there hasn't been a witness that has disagreed with that. And, he looks like someone who's sitting in court that maybe is a little bit wide-eyed. He can rub his face a lot sometimes, or wiggle. Other days he sits still. I found it interesting when looking at the crime scene photos. I can't say there's this ultimate creep factor in him. A part of him, he just looks like a guy, a little bit like a deer in headlights. I would say. Okay, Marcus is nodding. That's kind of how I see him. But I've also been, I want to say, very impressed, and my heart goes out to his family, who has been there every day. His wife, his mother, his father, his stepfather that he considers like a father, his sister, his daughter testifying on the stand saying that she loves her father and trying to hold back tears as she looks up at the ceiling. I have a lot of compassion for his family as I've watched them in the courtroom. They are victims in this too. It's just nobody wins in this. And it's very, very sad and solemn in that courtroom every day. And it feels small. You have their family, and then just right across you have all of Abby and Libby's family who have been there every single day. And so there's a heaviness in that courtroom every day. And my heart goes out to everyone in that courtroom.
Yeah. Really well said. and people forget about the peripheral victims in all this, which are the family members on both sides. So, Lauren, thank you so much. Again, the podcast is Hidden True Crime. Lauren comes from Broadcast News, like Marcus and myself, the COE. So I appreciate the reporting, and who knows? I guess closings could end tomorrow, and there could potentially be a verdict. We don't know. So we're going to stay on standby, and maybe we will try to grab Lauren again if she's not incredibly busy at whatever moment we try to grab her in, but I'm sure she will be. But we will stay in close touch. The COE will. Thank you, Lauren. You're awesome. Appreciate it. And so let's say hello to your husband, and we'll get you back on soon.
Will do. Thanks so much for having me. We'll see you guys. Bye,
Take
Marcus.
care.
Bye.
And then there was one. So for those joining late, again, Susan Hendricks has kind of a big scoop related to this trial, which came up moments before the show started. And Marcus has been on the ground for a local CBS affiliate there. So, Marcus, one of the things I think that this expert said today, and correct me if I'm wrong, because I'm obviously not inside the courtroom, he gave this doctor, the psychiatrist, gave a date of June 20th, 2023. He said this was a time when Richard Allen was showing no signs of psychosis. And he, at that time, tells the doctor, and I quote here, wanted to apologize to the families and his victims. Did that happen today? What was your reaction to that?
Yes, that did happen today. And this witness, the psychiatrist, was very soft spoken. So everyone was paying extra attention to every word he said. And that was his direct quote, that on June 20th, when the psychiatrist said Richard Allen had come back to that baseline that we were talking about earlier, kind of close to how he came in to Westfield Correctional Facility after his psychotic symptoms. He still said, I want to say sorry to the families of his victims.
That's obviously got to be concerning. So there's a woman, Brianne Wilbur, who I think was a defense witness, who then was called as a rebuttal witness today. And she testified about a Snapchat video from the day these two girls were, murdered. And then I think they were discovered on Valentine's Day. I feel like there's always horrible crimes on Valentine's Day. But what was the testimony in relation to this Snapchat? What was the state trying to get across here?
Yeah, so the two testimonies that came before the psychiatrist, and Brianne was one of them, was very short. Basically going back to their timeline, witness timelines that were near the Monon High Bridge on February 13, 2017. And they were just looking to try and get out of someone, was there anyone else on the trail that you saw, that looking for that extra piece or extra person that they could rule out, because this is the state asking these questions. And Brianne testified that she didn't see anyone, she couldn't recall anyone of note on the trail that day that she was out there. And she said she was out there at about 12:30 p.m.
I'm just looking at another comment here. KCL, for those who do not know, is awesome. And she's tips us off on a lot of things. And she's in the know on so many trials. Big asset for anyone that knows her, even though I did question her earlier. For me, that's just the journalist in me, KCL, don't mind me. But for me, she says the best piece of evidence against Richard Allen is the video that Libby took, where she got the abductor/killer on video and audio. And Libby and Abby were obviously scared to death. What do you say? What's your response to this? People obviously have been questioning this since it's, ever been shown. What do you think the jurors are thinking in regards to this quote unquote best piece of evidence?
Yeah, I would say I don't know if that's the best piece of evidence as someone sitting in the courtroom, because it's still not definitive. You can draw your conclusions about it, but who that man in the video is, there's still a lot of questions surrounding that. And I think some of the jurors may share that thought. We've talked about the confessions, and there's also that unspent cartridge that was found at the scene. That's a big piece that an Indiana State Police forensics examiner concluded that it had to come from Richard Allen's gun. I think that is a very big piece.
Interesting. But the weapon was never used, obviously, right? Because they were killed by having their throats slit. So
Yeah, so
is it
that gun that they say that unspent shell casing came from was not what caused the injuries to Abby and Libby.
so is that kind of like, in the Brian Koberger case in Idaho, where there's a hearing tomorrow that we're going to cover, he famously drops or he is purported to be the one who drops the knife sheath, although he has not been convicted. Is this a situation where they think he just dropped a cartridge, like he had a weapon, didn't use it, but the weapon comes from the cartridge comes from could only come from his gun, is what you're saying?
Yeah, so the state's theory has been that while that video was being taken on Libby's phone, that whoever bridge guy is used a gun to kind of coax them down the hill. And in that, having that out, taking it out of their pocket or whatever, that cartridge came out of the gun.
So besides that, obviously there's other key evidence. We're talking recorded phone calls where Richard Allen is at one point speaking with his wife, allegedly confessing to the murders. I mean, how powerful is that? It sounds like the defense is doing their best to try to muddy the waters with all these confessions, but I didn't realize it was over 60. That seems like admittedly, not having followed this the way you guys have, that seems like a bit of a bridge too far, unless he's truly, mentally ill and was just going through, obviously some sort of psychotic issues, or was, the other factor is that he was being held in sort of solitary confinement where he kind of just broke, and people say he had to confess. But besides this cartridge, recorded phone calls, does anything else come out that is that sticks out to you from the trial at this point?
I have been going back in my own reports, and the two biggest pieces of evidence I would say is that cartridge and the more than 60 confessions that he made while he was in prison. And just in case people aren't aware, yes, there are more than 60, and they were all made in that period when he was in state prison. Most of them were in Westville Correctional Facility in 2023, and also Wabash Valley Correctional Facility in central Indiana.
And what about the sort of the defense claim that he was just desperate to get out and therefore confess? But I mean, are you desperate enough that you confess 60 plus times, right?
I think there's definitely more to that question, because I would say the confessions is the thing that both sides have spent arguably the most time on. And obviously the defense is going to spend a lot of time trying to undo what the state is saying in their case. And multiple, whether it was, so we had Richard Allen, psychologist, testify, we had the psychiatrist testify today, and we also had two other psychologists testify. And I think there's more to that rather than Richard Allen saying, I need to get out of this. This is a man who hasn't had any prior criminal history. He's never spent a night in jail, let alone state prison. So that's something to consider. He had no idea what he was walking into. So he was sent to Westville Correctional Facility to be a safekeeper, and he wound up in the same unit that people convicted of serious crimes are in solitary confinement. The psychiatrist today testified that they had an emergency meeting to try and make him more comfortable because he was showing concerning signs of mental health decline. So they gave him a tablet, which other people in solitary confinement don't have, a television at a time, to try and make him more comfortable. But once again, this is a man who has never spent any time in prison, and he's by himself, and he came into prison with major depressive disorder. So that pre-existing mental health condition, I think, when it goes back to like the juror's perspective, gives a little more, I don't know what the word would be, I guess, credibility to what the defense is arguing, that it's not unreasonable to say that his mental health would decline a lot if he's coming in with those pre-existing conditions. So I know I was talking a little bit in circles.
No. That's really interesting. There's a little argument going on here in the chat. Kim French The video is only 42 seconds and very shaky phone video going all over the place. You can't really, I think she means can't really see anything. And then Goose here says the video is not a smoking gun at all. If it is, we got a problem with the system. Gray Hughes Investigates, who I understand has been covering this closely. The video is incredibly important for putting the timeline all together. It's key to the case. What's your take on this controversial 42 seconds of video?
Yeah, so I would agree that the video is it's crucial to putting that timeline together, but it's definitely not a smoking gun. Like I said, from being in the courtroom every day, the cartridge found at the scene and the confessions are definitely the two biggest pieces of evidence against Richard Allen, but that video plays a big role in kind of piecing together what happened that afternoon. So of course, that's going to aid the investigation.
You know, something you said that I knew from some prior shows that we've done on this is that he had no prior criminal record, and I believe he worked at a CVS,
Yes.
where they have the world's longest receipts. But I digress. No criminal record. There's, as far as I know, no really known motive here. What would suddenly trigger Richard Allen? I know you don't know the answer, but I'm just posing it to suddenly, out of the blue, go and do this to these two girls. I mean, that's got to be a question that the jurors have to be asking themselves. Is that something that the defense has underscored well enough, do you think, that, look, this guy is a guy that's never committed a crime in his life? And if you talk to, people who study criminology, they'll tell you people work their way up into more devious and severe crimes. But then you look at Brian Koberger, as far as we know, in Idaho, he never really did much. And now he's accused of murdering 4 people by stabbing them to death in the most vicious way possible. But has there been any talk about a possible motive here?
Interestingly enough, today was the 17th day of proceedings. Motive has not come up. You know, the defense has said, they've painted, their defendant, their client, as, this guy who just lived his life in Delphi, kind of insinuating that, why would he do this? But there has been no talk of motive. The defense has spent most of their time in that aspect, really focusing on undoing what the state is saying about the confessions.
Then there's obviously talk of Bridge Guy. Who is Bridge Guy? Some people say it's Richard Allen, but what are we referring to there? I assume it's from the video, but that's become kind of like an anonymous name for whoever has committed this crime, correct?
Yes. So Bridge Guy, anyone who has seen the infamous video that was taken off of Libby's phone that law enforcement released all the way back in 2017, Bridge Guy is that guy that is over the two girls' shoulders. And in court, we've heard enhanced audio to that of saying down the hill. And the girls, towards the end of that video, were very evidently kind of nervous or scared at the end of that.
By the way, people don't know this because, not everyone is inside baseball and broadcast news, but what shows are you reporting for? And are you there, or are you going back home every night?
No, so Fort Wayne's about 2 hours away. So I'm living here in Delphi. I'm about 3 blocks from the courthouse, and I'm doing as much as I can for all the shows that we have, because obviously this kind of evolves by the hour, especially when you're in court. So like Lauren was saying earlier in the show, it's, you have to jump through a lot of hoops to get in the courtroom and effectively get information out. So when we have our morning recess, I call my new producer and I give her the most up-to-date information so they can run a story about it. I'm live in the 5 p.m. and 6 p.m. Newscasts, and then I record something with the most up-to-date information for our 11 p.m. newscast, and then I write my script to go into the morning show to see what we could expect for that day when it airs the next day.
So the bottom line, in local news, they torture you, but it's fun. I've been there. You do get tortured, but while you're doing it, it can be miserable. But when you look back on it, I promise, Marcus, you will look back on it fondly. So what time are you getting up at? Like, you have to be in line by like 3 a.m. or something? Is that what I'm hearing?
No, so it's a little different in me and Lauren's cases because Judge Gull ruled that 12 credentialed media can be in the courtroom. So it's interesting in the fact that we have all these media outlets from Indiana that want to be in the courtroom, and we're actually all working together. We formed a media coalition to put competition aside and share information to give out to those who aren't in the courtroom. So we enter a lottery to get the 12 seats in the courtroom for that day. And as the trial has gone on and the weeks have gone on, less and less people have stayed. So I've been in the courtroom every day this week. I was in 4 out of 5 days last week. And since I have that credentialed media pass, I could get in line at 7:50 before the doors open at 8. But on Friday, for instance, I don't have a spot. And if I want to get in the morning, I would have to do exactly what Lauren's doing and set up a chair as soon as court ends on Thursday and have someone wait there until the next day.
Wow. I can't tell you how impressed I am, by the way, with Marcus. I did not have anywhere near this level of reporting skill at his age, not even close. And I still don't. From Stephanie here, can Marcus explain more about the enhanced video? I'm saying here that some people, I guess, in the Hidden True Crime podcast are talking that maybe it's even edited. So what's the latest with this video and the enhancement?
Yeah, so the original video that was released to the media all the way back in 2017 was very, very short, and they kind of zoomed in on Bridge Guy. It was the law enforcement's attempt to kind of say, hey, do you know who this is? But in court, we saw a longer version. It was 42 seconds. And first we saw the raw video, and it's very shaky. It's not stable. It's hard to kind of pick out things and where things are and orient yourself as a viewer. But then the state brought in the enhanced video where they stabilize the video. So it goes from like vertical to horizontal. They stabilize that. And then they also tried to enhance the audio so you could hear the words that are coming from that man's voice, because for the state, that's important to show that the girls were being coaxed down this hill.
From Pauline B here, this question comes up, I think, a lot in all cases. The same thing has come up again in Coburg, or no one's been murdered at the University of Idaho since. But the question is, did any witness explain why there were no prior murders or murders for the 5 years after? I mean, there's always a possibility that, some random serial killer, you just don't know, who just, was driving through, whatever it is. I'm just obviously making up a hypothetical right there. In terms of witnesses, who do you think which witness has stood out to you the most over this 18 days now that you've been sitting there?
That is a very tough question. We've seen almost 75 witnesses. Let's see here. I will say any of I guess one that does stick out to me is Detective Steve Mullen, who has been in this investigation from the beginning, just for the simple fact that he's been called to the stand 5 times. And he's working with the prosecution. He's a investigator for the prosecutor in Carroll County. So he wants to see this conviction, but the defense also called him to try and poke holes in the case. And they were able in some cases to whittle him down a little bit, especially when it came to the first days of the investigation from February 13, 2017 to March 21st, 2017. They don't have the interviews from any witnesses or suspects in that time. And that was something the defense was able to get out of Mullen.
That's super interesting. Thank you, Gray Hughes Investigates. Keep up the good work. Thanks for bringing on your guests. The video places BG, who is Richard Allen, by all evidence at the end of the bridge. His confession, Bridge Guy, his confession regarding the white van matches. Tell us about that. What was the confession about the white van? Where was the white van?
Yeah, so the white van's interesting because it's not something we've heard a lot about until trial. So Richard Allen, at least his psychologist in prison, Dr. Monica Walla, recorded that he told her a detailed confession, and that included seeing a white van on a nearby private drive that scared him. And the state tracked down the man who lives where this private drive connects to. And it turns out he had a white van. And we know that the girls were last seen on the bridge at 2:13. That's when that video of Bridge Guy was recorded. And the prosecution's timeline says that that phone stopped moving at 2:32. Well, this guy that lives along that private drive would be getting home from work at the same time. So that's something that's come up that we haven't heard a lot about until the trial, that we've been focusing on a lot. But the defense went back to his original statements to law enforcement in 2017. And this man with the white van said that he, at least back then, the defense is saying that he went to service ATMs that he owns after work, so then he wouldn't have been home at 2:30. But he's been called to the stand twice, and he stands firm that he was home at around 2:30.
Wow. There's going to be so much for this jury, obviously, to go over.
So much.
Yeah, it's crazy. Aside from the no cameras in 2024, it bugs me that Gull tells witnesses not to speak into the microphone. I've heard things about this judge. I mean, how's she handling this case, Frances Gull?
Yeah, what I'll say is she's from Fort Wayne, which is where I work and live. She just runs an orderly courtroom. I mean, she had a media briefing the day before trial started, laying out the rules. And she basically said, the prosecution, the defense, myself, we are at work and we're here to do our job. And she wanted minimal distractions. And she did give media the opportunity to ask questions about anything that they might be confused about. So I think it all comes down to her really wanting order in the courtroom and minimal distractions, especially since this is such a highly publicized case. I think she didn't want anything to be compromised as well.
Okay. I'll tell you what, guys, Marcus will stick around, I guess, for a little bit longer. So I'm going to go to the bottom of the chat and put in the triple Qs and we'll get questions. But you heard this poor guy's doing live or taped hits for every show at his station. So that's a lot of work for him. What about this from Rosemary Romero? Again, always with good questions outside of Toronto. What happened to the clothing that Richard Allen wore the day on the bridge, allegedly on the bridge? I thought the clothing was collected in the search warrant. Any info on his clothing?
Yeah, so as a reporter who's covering this case and we don't have a verdict yet, I will say that Bridge Guy and Richard Allen, in my mind, are still two different people. So Bridge Guy was seen wearing a Carhartt jacket, or looking like a Carhartt jacket, a workman's jacket that was a dark color and blue jeans. In the search warrant of Richard Allen's house, there was a Carhartt jacket taken, but besides that jacket being taken from his house, there hasn't been any further discussion of anything being found on that jacket.
So you don't think Bridge Guy is Richard Allen? Is that what you're saying?
I'm just going to say that I'm not going to comment on that until there's a verdict.
Okay. Interesting. From Lee T here, can you give insights about Richard Allen's missing 2017 phone among the many old phones he's kept? What's the deal with that? Why would a guy have all these phones?
So I can't give too much insight on the 2017 phone because even though, and that's something that a lot of people in court found strange, that in the search warrant, they found several old phones, but his phone from 2017 wasn't one of those phones. So we don't have any cell phone records to look at where his phone was bouncing off cell towers that day.
This question, what do you think about the jurors being able to talk about the case with each other? Is this true? Are they allowed? They were always, as far as I know, been directed not to discuss the case. Are they allowed to talk about it? This jury is being sequestered? Is that right?
Yeah, so the jury is from Allen County, which is where Fort Wayne is as well. So it's about 2 hours away. So they're all away from home right now. Judge Gull has laid out that, once you leave the courtroom, you're not supposed to talk about the case. You're not supposed to draw any conclusions, especially with each other. There are times in the jury box that, someone may mumble to someone really quickly, but they're not having conversations in the jury box. And I think Judge Gull also understands that these are normal people that didn't sign up for this. So she's, being very, she's being very careful with them, making sure that, they're taking lunch at an adequate time and stuff like that.
Hate to digress here, but STS singles might become a thing. Nicole wants to know, is Marcus single and available? Sorry, Joel, I had to. Marcus, you don't have to answer that.
Okay.
So the defense case, the primary argument is that, again, Richard Allen's confessions were made under duress and during a mental health crisis, pointing to this prolonged solitary confinement. Do you think the defense did a good enough job of laying that out there, or did the state do a better job of undercutting that defense allegation?
I think the defense did everything they could as far as establishing that it could have been because of his pre-existing mental health conditions and his conditions while in prison. I've said that the confessions along with the cartridge are probably, at least in my mind, the two biggest pieces of evidence. But I do think the defense did a good job at laying it out for the jury that, once again, I'm going to go back to this is a man who's never been in prison before. He's never been convicted of a crime, and he's in this unit with all other people that have been convicted of serious crimes. And I'll go back to when the state was presenting their case. They had 8 prison personnel that worked at Westfield Correctional Facility testify, and several of them said that in recent memory, they haven't heard of anyone else being housed in that facility that hasn't been convicted of a crime. So I think statements like that, when the jury hears that, it definitely makes them wonder if it's because of that extreme duress.
What about character witnesses? And then now, STS, I'm going to scroll down to the bottom here. So put in the triple Qs, and I'll try to get a few more questions before we say goodnight. But have members of Richard Allen's family, they have testified here. Is that right, as character witnesses?
They've testified, but very quickly. I wouldn't necessarily say as your typical character witness. So in prison, one of the confessions that Richard Allen had said was that he molested his sister and his daughter. So they brought his sister and daughter onto the stand, and this was just 2 days ago, I believe. And the defense asked them and said, has Richard Allen ever molested you? And they both said no. And then the defense also asked, do you love Richard Allen? And they both said yes. And then the defense made sure to ask, would you lie for him? And they both said no. And that was the extent of what you would call character witnesses.
What was the jury reaction to that? Because I think that's really effective.
Yeah, in some ways.
Hang on one sec.
Yeah.
I'm sorry. COE, tell Dreek to come on in. Join the fun. Robin Dreek is a retired counterintelligence former FBI agent who's been following this case really closely. But I'm sorry to interrupt you, Marcus. It was rude of me. Go ahead, please.
You're fine. I think at times we've been saying the jury's been very attentive. They're paying very close attention. I've even been saying they're laser focused. But there's also times where it's kind of hard to read them. So I honestly can't pinpoint a reaction from any of the jurors during those short testimonies.
So, again, I think you said it was 9:06 local time. The defense kind of abruptly rests, and then we get that rebuttal. So afterwards, I understand, or maybe even before the state's rebuttal, Judge Gull met, I don't know if it was a sidebar or in chambers, with both the state and defense, and basically were discussing, jury instructions and closing arguments. So what are we expecting tomorrow? What do you think?
Yeah, so tomorrow is when closing arguments will begin, and I believe that they will end tomorrow because Judge Gull said that they're going to get 2.5 hours each, and not much more than that, because while there's been a lot of evidence in this case and she wants to give them enough time to give their closing arguments, she does want closing arguments to be over tomorrow as well.
Robin Dreek has joined the conversation. What a awesome surprise here. Robin, before you even say a word, I might have you back on tomorrow because we might be doing this if there is a
verdict. I'd love to. I'm already booked up tomorrow night, though. I'm so sorry. I just got it from Steven, so I apologize. I just got off another call, so I'm a little...
No worries. We were kind of wrapping up, but I wanted to get your take. I know
I've been tracking the case close.
Yeah, Robin's got a new book out, where you see it right behind Unbreakable Alliances. Go out and get it. Robin's a former counterintelligence officer with the FBI. He's one of the guys that helped work on 9/11. All around good dude, and some people say a Tom Cruise lookalike.
Your nation.
Yeah, I can sort of see that a little bit. So,
Younger days.
Robin, do you, I mean, and by the way, please meet Marcus, who's a local CBS affiliate reporter
Hey, Marcus.
from
Hi, how
Fort
are ya?
Wayne. He's been giving us amazing insight here. But Robin, you know, there's a gazillion cases out there. What got you kind of hooked on this one from your perspective?
Oh boy, we've been tracking this one for a long time, Joel. There's a few things. One, you know, obviously the claims of early on with defense with Odinism, and then the missteps by the investigators early on, the missing evidence, all the back and forth with the judge, and really the thing that's really drawn me in is, yeah, I'm always a victim's advocate guy, and I just have a hard time, no matter what the verdict is on this, that the family, again, I don't want to speak for the family, but you know, you put yourself in that position. Will they feel that they really got the right guy? Because I have so much reasonable doubt, just because I do, because as a behavior guy, I'm always looking for a pattern of someone's behavior over a period of time that shows an escalation that it'll do some act like this. And there's been nothing we've seen in this investigation, including the interrogation, including the claims by the prosecution's psychologist, that says that he fits the pattern of someone that would do this. So that's why I have a hard time with it.
Yeah, I was just going to ask you, you know, I always hear you talking about arcs, right? Like the
Yep.
way, you know, people's behavior patterns kind of go in an arc. Here, Marcus, you know, was telling us all that no previous criminal record whatsoever. I mean, not even for tossing a piece of gum wrapper on the ground. Absolutely zero. The guy worked at CVS,
Yep.
and then suddenly escalates to slitting the throat of two young girls. It doesn't add up. But then I think about Brian Koberger, again, right here, right as I said it, right here. Brian Koberger has no record either. Brian Koberger is a young man, though. So there's well, go ahead, Robin.
So Brian Koberger is also younger. He actually fits the pattern of a serial killer in the making because of his earlier days. I mean, even his online postings when he's 14 years old, talking about the psychological traumas he's had. He's had addiction problems. He's had problems with feeling sensations. And so that is typical things you're going to see in psychopathy. Again, I'm not a licensed clinician, so I don't want to speak out of turn, but those are typically things you see in psychopathy, as well as he had stalking behaviors. And so he had a pattern of escalation that potentially, again, he's not convicted of this, but it fits a pattern that says that makes sense. Now they just have to prove that what our conjecture says is true. But when you're looking at Richard Allen, there is no previous anything there. There's no acts of violence. There's no fascination with crime. There's just nothing. And so here's also with Koberger. There's a lot of people in Koberger's life that said the dude is creepy. And what's creepy? Creepy is when we have an incongruence in our words, actions, and deeds, and our behavior, which is incongruent with what the world perceives as normal for the context in which we're living. We haven't heard that from him, and being Richard Allen. And also when you start out with a level of transparency, talking about how when he first volunteered to go in, when he said he was in the area, and they moved rapidly from an interview where they established trust and they jumped onto an accusation in an interrogation. He originally was very trusting and he was very revealing. He talked about his suicidal thoughts, and I think they really blew an opportunity to have him even disclose more because they jumped to an accusation so fast. So again, long narrative answer that I give, and I apologize.
No, not at all.
The patterns of behavior are very, very different to me. I just don't see the leap to that kind of level of violence, of slashing of two throats.
The defense here is wishing that Robin Dreek was sitting on that jury. Marcus, there were a couple of comments saying the cops were called to Richard Allen's house at one point. We'll get Robin's take on that after you go. Also, Google searches. What was he searching? What do we know about this aspect of the case?
Yeah, so the Google searches that's how the defense, the prosecution wrapped up their case pretty dramatically. They dropped that in the juror's lap and rested their case without saying anything, but we had the opportunity to go look at those searches after. And Honestly, from my point of view, there's nothing particularly damning in those searches. I mean, this is a man who lives in Delphi. Everyone in Delphi was very heavily impacted by this case because of how close-knit the community is. So there are times after 2017 where he's Googling Delphi, or Delphi Murders Update was one from 2019. But I don't think that's incriminating. And then also there was one that stuck out to some other reporters about kidnapping and hostage movies, like the best kidnapping and hostage movies of all time. But I don't think that says anything about this case as well.
Robin, I'd like you to weigh in here, but Jackie Bay, Richard Allen has an expunged record. Wife did not press charges where he came home drunk. Wife called the cops. The cops took him to the hospital. Still, I mean, that's, drunken, disorderly conduct, which is not, killing two girls. But how do you square this?
So I call that life. And that's life. He's a troubled guy, and this isn't someone who's under being prosecuted for being a perfect guy that we're saying he's a perfect human being that didn't have issues or flaws or anything like that. He's a human. But back to the point of the Google searches. So if you look at, again, I'm all about data and data adding up. And that's what I'm not a criminal profiler, but I'm a behaviorist, and you're looking for data points that fit a pattern of behavior for people that committed acts like this before. And so Google searches, let's look at Google searches. When someone that, first of all, if he doesn't have prior experience doing this, I'll say, because he doesn't have life reps in this life arc, this is going to be a first attempt of him doing this. He's going to be very rudimentary. He's going to be very basic in his processes of doing horrendous things. And so when we've seen this in other cases, when people do Google searches, they do, how do I slash a throat? How do I get away with it? How do I dispose of a body? Those are the types of Google searches that would be incriminating. Google searches for researching the type of research that I do before I do come on one of these shows where I became interested in on a subject. Those are the kind of Google searches he's done that look like everything I do, everything that someone's interested in the case. He didn't research how to get away with a crime like this since it's his first time doing it.
Yeah. But there's a comment here, Marcus, Real Plant Diaries, kidnapping was Googled. Do we know what the context of that was? Are you familiar with that?
Yeah, that goes back to the movie searches. It was top whatever number he was looking for, kidnapping and hostage movies. So it wasn't, going back to what was just said, wasn't how to get away with kidnapping or best way to kidnap. It was in the context of movies.
Yeah. So Robin, it sounds, obviously I'm not going to put words in your mouth, that you do not think he could rise to this level of kind of violent crime without any history. And again, I think one of the big differences between him and Kohberger is obviously age. Richard Allen is how old? 52. 52. So, that's a long time to go without acting on an impulse. Is it not, Robin?
Yeah. And it's also a long time from the time that the murders happened to him still living and not moving if he thought he was a suspect or he thought he did it and he stayed in the same area. And there's been no other, it's kind of funny how there was no other, not funny, it's tragic but good that there was no other assaults and sexual assaults or murders. Also, since the neighbor that's property that this happened on died. And that's a funny coincidence. So again, from what I see, me personally, I don't see the data points that add up to match to him today. And I keep waiting for more. And I love being able to change my mind because that meant there's something more to learn. But at the onset of this case, the sad thing is I'm saying exactly the same things today that I was saying before the case even started, in the system, because I was expecting that prosecution must have more. Because they should, and I just haven't seen it.
Yeah, and Robin, how do we know that this was his first crime, not just the first crime where he was caught? That's always, I guess, a question, but he'd have to be pretty slippery, right?
Well, what you're relying on in cases like that is you're looking for law enforcement to do their due diligence, because what happens is generally when there's a murder and it fits a pattern and it has a certain look to it, law enforcement is going to look for other murders in areas and that are unsolved crimes they're going to match that pattern to see if there's anyone else that fits that description. Because when you do something one time, you typically do it the same way again with minor changes as you've learned along the way as they're progressing. And that, I mean, that's what serial killers do. Not saying that this fits that pattern, but if he's going to do it again, it would that. So now let's look at that. If this was a potential serial killer thing, he would have done it before. There would have been an escalation. Serial killers generally don't, again, I'm just going by stats I read too off of the Google machine. They generally don't start at this age. So then it would be a one-off. And so if this is a one-off murders of first of all, one-off murders of strangers, because there's been no connection whatsoever that anyone's been able to establish. It's less than 8% of the people are strangers in these cases. Now, you do have the cases like in Maryland of the Rachel Morin murder, but that was an illegal immigrant that traveled around. So those things do happen, but it's under 8% of the time that does it. Then you have a double murder. It's even less percentage than that. They don't even keep a stat on that one. So again, it just goes to, I'm just looking at numbers and the numbers just don't add up for me.
Interesting. From Dust Witch here, back to Marcus. Marcus, you've been super generous with your time. We'll go another 5-10 minutes, I promise, and then we'll wrap it up.
Sounds good.
By the way, Marcus, what are you doing tomorrow night?
What am I doing tomorrow night? I will be at the courthouse until closing arguments are done.
All right. Any chance you'd want to hop on our show again tomorrow if there's a verdict or after closings?
Yeah, if I got the time, I will let you know and I'll be on.
Awesome. Thank you so much. See, I pin people down on air. That way it's more
the only way to do it.
It's the only way. I did it to Robin already. It's so obnoxious. What about the wife? I think you said it was the daughter and someone else, but what's the deal with the wife? How come she wasn't called as a witness?
Yeah, so it was Richard Allen's daughter and sister that testified. That's a question you have to answer probably from being in the courtroom. So I actually sit right behind Richard Allen's family, and his wife is incredibly emotional, and his family is really close with the defense team. Today, after they rested their case, they were all hugging with the defense team. And anytime that Kathy Allen, her name's Kathy, was brought up in the trial, she would start crying. And when she was listening to those phone calls between her and Richard when he was in prison, she was crying the entire time. So it was probably a decision with the defense team that she might not even be able to get words out on the stand because she has been so emotional.
So I'd like to bring up another thing on that, Joel, because that's a great observation. And I think that's really poignant here too. So when we're looking at people's patterns of behavior, the other thing I'm looking at is the relationships in their life. Who is standing with them? Who isn't standing with them? Because that says a lot about the kind of life they're leading and that arc. And if you have family members that are that emotional because they care so deeply about that person in their lives. And so let's look at a comparison. Do another thought experiment. Let's look at Lori Daybell Vallow. How many people stood with that loon job? Because no one liked her.
By the way, I was just at the Sarah Boone trial who zipped her boyfriend into a suitcase.
Yep.
No one was there. Zero.
Yep.
Except her girlfriend from jail. That was it.
100%. These things, who stands with you in your life in these moments says an awful lot also about the probability of these things being who they think it is. So I also, again, it's not everything, but it's a totality of all these data points, because that was a big question I had, was what does the family think about this? And you being in the courtroom says an awful lot about it.
Yeah.
Marcus, I'm just curious to get your reaction to what Robin is saying, because someone said, well, Robin hasn't been in the courtroom. Well, I mean, I don't want to put you on the spot, but I guess I just did. I mean, Robin is essentially saying, look, the data points, which is what he studies, doesn't add up. Cauliflower here says the data points are the evidence, doesn't have to add up to psychological data points. He's talking about the evidence. Don't want to put you on the spot, but I mean, what do you think of that? Just the fact that he's never been accused of committing another violent crime, and suddenly here we are at a double murder trial for a 13 and 14-year-old girl.
Yeah, I also had the opportunity to watch his 2 interrogations before he was arrested in the courtroom in their entirety. And as far as I could see, he and his wife were living a very normal life. In those videos, in the when he was being interrogated, he seemed like a very normal guy, and his family has been there every single day. His mother, his sister, his wife, and his stepfather. That Lauren said it's like his father. They have been there every single day, and they're standing by him. And I've even had the opportunity to speak with Richard Allen's mother, and she totally believes in his innocence. And she even said to me today, because there was a excessively long break today between defense resting their case and the state rebuttal. And she said to me, she's like, haven't we suffered enough? So that's how they see this. They see this as not only Richard Allen suffering, but them suffering. Like was said before, it's, it's not just, how do I word this? It's a lose-lose for everyone, pretty much.
I agree.
Yeah, it's a good way to put it there. Patty Barnett, any opinions, Marcus, back to you on this one, regarding the sheriff who used his arrest of Richard Allen as a campaign slogan to win an election? We're seeing this going on. Just happened in Los Angeles. We had a DA who was in an election. He lost, by the way. But, talking about resentencing the Menendez brothers. Has the defense been able to bring this in as evidence or make any comments regarding that maybe this was, his arrest was politically motivated?
That hasn't been able to really been brought into the courtroom at all. That's been talk that's been outside of the courtroom. And I don't really have my own opinion on it right now, but I will say that Richard Allen was arrested on October 26th, I believe, 2017. And one of the lead investigators, Tony Liggett, was elected sheriff the next week. So that lines up there. And Tony Liggett, who is now the Carroll County Sheriff, was on the investigation since day one.
Robin, to you, what about him being there wearing the same clothes? We're talking about the video, I guess, and the 61 confessions. How do you square that? I mean, that's a lot of confessions, Robin.
Yeah. So first, let's look at the clothes. So it is a rare, and I don't believe in coincidences, but the descriptions, and again, you being in the courtroom, you'd know more, but from what I've seen from everything that's come out, it's not actually the same exact outfit, and he doesn't have the same look, same heights. I mean, it's not exact match. And also, memories over time suck. Especially when you start interviewing people that far after an event took place and you've had other inputs come in, you have confirmation bias, and we have false memories implanted on people. That happens frequently. That's why I'm not saying you discount interviews that happen that later, but you're looking for harder data points and evidence. And believe me, I want to be wrong. I want to think that they got the right guy. I'm just telling you from an investigative standpoint and from a profile, there's not enough that fits that pattern. That's a good match. I'm not saying it's not a complete bad match, but it just doesn't add up. And then when it comes to the 61 confessions, do any research whatsoever with anyone that, first of all, he's had mental illness before as self-described by him and depressiveness. And then you actually look at the fact of how he was kept in isolation. Again, I wasn't in the courtroom, but from what I've read, isolation and subjected to really, really horrendous conditions. Human beings in isolation, especially with a lack of sun and especially with any kind of nutritional screw arounds, especially if you have chemical imbalances because you also have depression beforehand, is a recipe for being suicidal. So this isn't suicide by cop, but there is actually a decent percentage of false confessions of people that happen that are suicidal in the jail system because they just want to end it. I'm not saying that's what it is, but I'm just saying there's a lot of data for me to wipe out those confessions, or not to wipe them out, but I look at them skeptically just because of the condition he was under when they were gotten. And also, if you look at the details of the confession, he wasn't given any new details. Again, only from what I've seen and heard via social media, but they were just very, very broad sweeping that we could pick up. Like, Joel, you could confess exactly the same way he did.
Look who we've got here. She's pitch black. It is Susan Hendricks. Can't see you, though. Oh, there you are. In a red how you doing, Susan? I explained to people you had a big scoop. We didn't reveal what it was, but Susan was going to come on. She wrote the book, Down the Hill. What's happening, Susan?
What's
Let's get your
happening?
take. I might force you to come on the show tomorrow night. I think we're going to do something tomorrow night.
And you might be better off because I know this is like not. Sorry.
Do you think you can make it tomorrow night?
Oh, I could definitely.
Okay, awesome. How about give us a short take on your thoughts on all the last 18 days, real quickly.
Oh my gosh, you're terrible. So the truth. Okay, so I was just with the family, and my truth is that I think that he's going to be found guilty. I think there's enough evidence, and I think that what ties him to this the most is Richard Allen, is his own voice, is him saying down the hill.
You look like Halloweenish because you got this weird light on you, but now it's gone. So, by the way, Hendricks and I are both we're both in the same exact area of New Jersey.
Yeah, we have a connection in New Jersey. It's like
there's a whole Jersey vibe going on, and Marcus understands that. But
there really is. You know,
I mean, Susan, I'm gonna bring them back. I would never tell people what was going on tonight, but are you willing to share what was happening with you tonight?
Yeah, I was with so it was Anna, and it's Abby's mom was there, and it's Libby's aunt was there, who I'm very close to, and Libby's. So I'm very close to both of the families, but more so Libby's family. But they invited me to go out to dinner, and so I couldn't say no. And so it's, and they expressed their stresses about this, and like, what do you think, and how do you think this is gonna go? And my dad being a lawyer, and I'm thinking, I don't know. And Joel, like working in news, we always I equate it to sports. It's like you can elaborate on a game, or not elaborate, mind you. It's a pre-game to say, oh, well, if the jury's out this amount of time, this means something, and you never really know. With O.J. Simpson, 4 hours. With Jodi Arias, it was a short amount of time. And you always think, does short mean guilty? Does long mean not guilty? But you never know. But I will say this, and I know my lighting's horrific, and I'm in a car, and I apologize.
It's all good.
I'm in Delphi, and I totally apologize. But what I do say is that I feel like this jury is engaged, and the fact that they can ask questions. And Joel, I know that's weird to you, being from New Jersey, and the trials that we've seen, we never see that. But I think it allows for them to ask the questions now instead of all of a sudden when they're sequestered and they're like, okay, make a decision, and then you have to ask all those questions. So I think it matters. And my opinion is he'll be found guilty. I believe you're asking.
Ooh, Hendricks, we are. We're losing your audio. So I'm gonna ask you to come on tomorrow night. I'm gonna pop you out of here. We love having you.
Am I the Ann Burgess? Remember the Ann Burgess episode you had where she kept cutting out?
Yeah, that's you. Yeah. But I'll get you on tomorrow night when you have a stable Wi-Fi. I'll text you after the show.
All right, love you.
Be safe. Drive safely.
Sorry.
Be careful. Jersey. All right. Sorry.
So I'll be the guy that everyone can pound on, that I'm completely wrong in everything I'm saying. So, okay. I hope I am. I hope it's beyond reasonable doubt, because the only thing I care about in this entire thing is that the families feel like the right guy is going behind bars. That's, to me, that's all that matters.
Yeah. Just a couple quick things, and I mean really quick. But Marcus, back to you here. I've seen a few comments in the chat saying that they hope there's a second trial here, just because of the way this all was handled. People are throwing in the judge's name, Judge Francis Gull. Have you gotten the sense that people are disappointed overall with the way this all unfolded? And I'm talking like, from the prosecution beginning their case to where we're at now.
Yeah, for sure. And I mean, that's been talk of since before the trial started, with all the twists and turns and motions and hearings that we've had over the past several years leading up to the trial. from our viewers in Fort Wayne, whether it's in Facebook comments or emails to our station, a lot of people feel that this case wasn't handled the way it should have been. And even in the courtroom, with the defense trying to poke holes in the state's case, they've brought out a lot of stuff in the investigation that just wasn't done, or material that should be there going back to the first 5 weeks of interviews that were recorded over and they can't recover. So there's definitely people talking about that all the time, even before the trial started.
Finally, before closing, I was going to say arguments, but little closing thoughts tonight. Speaking of closing arguments, again, they're expected, the judge is giving them 2 to 2.5 hours. Marcus, do you think that we are going to get that full amount of time? I mean, has the trial been long enough where you think that they're going to utilize all that time? Because I also feel like you want to be, not succinct, might not be the right word, but you want to be direct and to the point with jurors. So do you think that the defense and the state will use all of that time?
You bring up a good point about, wanting to reach the jurors and not go around in circles too much. I could see them going an hour and a half to maybe 2 hours. I really do. This has been a long trial. Some of the testimonies lasted all day. There was one day where we had a witness on the stand for 8 hours. And while they're not going to go through everything in the case, that's what we had the trial for. I think there is enough to go over for each side to kind of remind the jury of everything that they did digest in the last 18 days.
Robin, for you, and then we'll get closing thoughts. Mr. Dreek, thoughts on the white van confession?
Tell me more about the white van confession.
Marcus, tell him more about the white van confession.
Yeah, so when you were actually saying about the confessions earlier, about how a lot of them were very generic, that's very true, except for this one. So Richard Allen, at least this is detailed in his psychologist from Westville Correctional Facility, her log. And it's the most detailed confession that we've seen so far. And it involved him saying that he led the girls down the hill, but he got scared when a white van drove by on a nearby private drive. And we know from the video timestamps on Libby's phone that was at 2:13. The state says that the last movements were at 2:30, and this guy usually gets home from work at 2:30. So that's something that came up in trial. They didn't even talk to this guy about his white van until August, the prosecution. That has been talked about a lot during trial.
So they didn't talk. So none of the video of his interviews that are missing would have mentioned that he would have found out about a white van prior to him actually using that in a confession. We're sure of that.
That's exactly where the missing interviews come into play.
Isn't that interesting? So I'm on the side, and you highlighted the thing really good there, Joel. Is to me, I got a lot of reasonable doubt because, and again, I'm not saying he's innocent. I'm just saying I don't believe. I'm not sold on it just because, and it's not because necessarily that he's innocent. It goes back to the case you were making before, Joel. The way that they investigated this case was so wrong. I think they did a lot of missteps, and when you don't investigate properly, you have all these gaps in storylines, you have all these gaps in evidence. The fact, and again, who knows why, but no DNA evidence. You got to be kidding me. Nothing,
and no weapon, right? Some people are saying he had 60 box cutters in his house, but I mean, a lot of people have things of that nature in their house. I don't know. I mean, I personally never would, but because I'm not handy. But I cannot find that man guilty on what I've heard Carolyn A. is saying. It's not necessarily about whether he's innocent or not. It's about whether there's enough reasonable doubt. That's what we've all also got to remember. Robin, Unbreakable Alliances. Robin, for those who do not know, is a retired counterintelligence agent with the FBI and is a behaviorist, as you heard him say. What is the book about? Where can we find the book, Robin?
Book is everywhere you can get your books. It's actually how we move through life's greatest challenges by creating great, healthy relationships in our lives and all the behaviors that go behind it. So I use a lot of stories from recruiting spies, and believe it or not, it's not about subterfuge, manipulation, or deception in any way like people might think. It's actually forging. And just like in this case here, you get confessions from people that trust you. You know, it's about having a great, healthy dialogue with someone and inspiring them to tell the truth before they have an opportunity to lie and try to deceive you. And so this book is about how we overcome everything in life through a great, healthy relationship.
Everyone get a copy. Learn about life from Robin
Thanks.
Dreek. Marcus Truccio, I probably just butchered it there, but this guy is the MVP of the night for sure. People are yelling at me that I've that I've had you overstay. I guess the welcome from my end, that I'm being whatever I'm trying to say at this point of the night. But Marcus joined Wayne in Fort Wayne, Indiana. That's WANE. It's a CBS affiliate, Wayne 15. I joined there September of 2023. This is now, if I'm right, November 2024. It's been a little over a year. What's it been like for you to cover this case, and your final thoughts? It's got to be an amazing learning experience.
Yeah, well, I went to Purdue and I worked at a CBS affiliate in Lafayette the year before that. So I was covering Richard Allen's arrest. So I have been able to follow this case for quite some time now. And it is this, I mean, to be in the courtroom for this trial every day, not only do I get to have insight on what I'm telling you guys about this case, but I'm learning so much about the legal system and just the way a trial works and how objections work and how the judge rules. It really is a big learning experience. But the case itself, like I've said, there's been so many twists and turns. We've had so many pretrial hearings. We've had the trial moved back so many times. And today in my live shot at 6 o'clock, actually, I was able to sense in the courtroom that people are finally starting to realize that it's real, that this is going to go to the jury very soon. And it was hard to see that when you're in day 10, 11, 12 of the trial.
Yeah. Final question. How long do you think they, if you had to guess, Marcus, I was at the Sarah Boone trial once again. That's just the most recent trial I've been to. 90-minute deliberations, which is nothing. You think this is going to go on for a few days here?
I do believe it will take days. I've been saying that. A lot of the other media people I've been with have been saying that. I think it will take at least a few days.
All right. On that note, Marcus, I'll hit you up later tomorrow with an email. Hopefully you can join us in case we could get, who knows, crazier things have happened.
Exactly.
Closing arguments are supposed to happen tomorrow. You could get a verdict, but at the very least, maybe we'll discuss closing arguments. Robin Dreek, thank you for coming on. Super last second. It was a crazy night. Susan Hendricks, as you heard, was having dinner with Abby and Libby's family, which is why she could not be here. And our thoughts obviously go out to the
100%.
families and, of course, the victims here, who are Abby and Libby, and all the peripheral family members. We'll see you back here. By the way, Brian Koberger's in court. Greg Skordas, who's a super seasoned criminal defense attorney, he's been covering the case, and he's going to be giving us legal analysis during Brian Koberger's hearing. That is the hearing to try to get him out of a potential death penalty trial. So we'll see how that goes. Thank you all for being here. Love you, America. Love you, Delphi. Love you, Virginia. And justice for Abby and Libby. Guys, stick around for 1 second for me.